Hey, what's up you guys, it's Dorothy and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to go into chapter 4, 4 Perfect Pebbles by Lila Pearl and Marianne Blumenthal-Lazan. So let's get right into this video. This video is going to contain sensitive topics and foul language. If you do not wish to continue, I suggest you click off the video now. You have been warned. Escape to Holland. On arriving in Rotterdam, the Blumenthals began once to experience the difficulties of living as exiles. About 20,000 German Jews had already fled to the Netherlands, a country that had long been tolerant of Jews and that had a Jewish population of its own of roughly 118,000. Some German refugees who had left Germany in the early 30s had been able to transfer their businesses to Holland and to establish comfortable lives for the families, but no such opportunities existed for those Jews who arrived in the later 1930s. Stripped of their possessions and essentially homeless, at first, Mama said, we were shifted around from one refugee center to another. All of them were overcrowded and had separate sleeping quarters for men, women, and children. Marianne was frightened of sleeping with so many strange children, and she cried all the time. After 3 months, we were given the opportunity to move to another place in Holland, Gouda, where there was a camp for Jewish refugee children ages 8 to 15. They had been sent there for safety from other parts of Nazi-dominated Europe. The work, Ruth recalled, was very hard, cooking, serving meals, and caring for the children, 125 or so, some of whom were orphans, but at least we could live there as a family during that summer of 1939, and Marianne was no longer afraid. While the Bloomfields tried to make the best of their life in Holland, deeply threatening events were taking place elsewhere in Europe. In keeping with his plans to expand Germany's territory eastward, Hitler had attacked and occupied Czechoslovakia on March 15, 1939. When this bold move met with no opposition from other nations, he went ahead with his next conquest, Poland, on September 1, 1939. 2 days later, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany after the conflict that became known as World War II began. How long, people in the Netherlands wondered? Would the Nazis respect Dutch neutrality, especially at risk where the nation's Jews, including refugees from nations other than Germany, now totaled about 140,000, and most immediate was the problem of how to accommodate the jobless Jewish refugees who continued to pour into their country. In the fall of 1939, with contributions from Holland's Committee for Special Jews Affairs, the Dutch government set up a permanent refugee camp in the northeastern Holland to be known as Westerbroek. The camp was located on a desolate and widespread moor, bitterly cold in winter and plagued with heat, flies, and sandstorms in summer, but it offered a home of sorts to Holland's Jewish refugees. On October 9, 1939, the first 22 families moved in. Each was given a small self-contained unit in which we lived. When the Bloomfields arrived to Westerbroek a couple of months later, they too were assigned to one of the 200 or so little houses. Actually, these units were connected to one another in rows, having the outward appearance of ordinary barracks, but they did have the advantage of being centrally heated. It was not so bad at all, Ruth said. We had a small kitchen with a sink and a hot plate that had one burner. This was just for coffee, tea, snacks, and so forth. All our regular meals we ate all in the communal dining hall. We also had a bathroom with a toilet and a sink. There was no tub or shower, so we could take only sponge baths, but there was also a bathhouse in the camp. In the largest room of the 4, we had a table and chairs and a bed that folded up against the wall during the day. This was where Walter and I slept. Mary and Albert slept in a smaller room just behind ours in double-decker bunk beds. Like the rest of the new residents, Ruth and Walter were assigned to work details from 7 a.m. to noon and from 2 p.m. to 7 in the evening. Ruth was given a job in the kitchen where the food for the communal dining room was prepared. Walter worked in the shoe repair shop. There even went some makeshift schooling for children. These activities helped pass the days as the family continued to wait for their longed-for visa for America. We worried, Ruth said, about all the changes in address we'd had since moving from Hanover, so we left a careful trail behind us. We were ready to pick ourselves up at any moment's notice, for even before leaving Germany, we had paid our passage to America on the Dutch ship Nieuw Amsterdam, and at last, in January 1940, after a wait of 15 months, we received our American visa in a camp at Westerbroek. Immediately, we booked space for March 1940, the first available sailing out of Rotterdam. 2 more months in Holland, and we were on our way. While Ruth and Walter made plans for the family's departure from Europe, Marianne and Albert fell into a rhythm of life in their new surroundings. Marianne, just turned 5, adjusted easily to Westerbroek. She made friends with the children of the other German refugee families and in the little houses. Among the adults, old friends and distant relatives found one another in the camp, and there was frequent visiting back and forth. It all seemed quite normal to me, Marianne recalled. for I had little else to compare it to. I could remember nothing of our life in Germany, so I did not miss the material things we had enjoyed there. Besides, no one else in Westerbork had much of value either. Marian remembered her favorite games and pastimes: jump rope, hopscotch, marbles. One of our hobbies was to collect foil wrappings. My friends and I traded them. The colorful ones were the most valuable. We smoothed them out with our nails and kept them between the pages of a notebook. There was another game that I made up to pass the time when I was alone. I would take a small mirror or a piece of glass and go for a walk through the rutted lanes of the camp. The mirror would pick up reflections of the sun, throwing a little square of light on the ground. I would pretend that this dancing patch of light was my own little puppy on a leash. In those early moments at Westerbork, with only about 700 refugees in the camp, the food was plain but plentiful. Pea soup, potatoes, cabbage dishes, and were the mainstay. Eggs, meat, and dried fruit were also still available. Marian was especially fond of the melted cheese on bread, but what she longed for most were sweets. I remember how greedy I was for anything sweet, so much so that I would even eat Saccharian tablets, and how I always wanted the bigger share of everything, even though I knew I was supposed to give half to Albert. Papa was very strict about these things and always stressed good manners and politeness. Once, when I was given a special treat by one of our neighbors, Papa sensed correctly that I had not said thank you. He made me return at once and say the proper words to express my appreciation. Spring was now approaching, and the refugees were pleasantly surprised to find yellow and purple flowered lupines and carpets of purple heather blooming on the barren heath almost in their doorways. But Ruth and Walter were not cheered by the sight. They had been bad news concerning their March book on the New Amsterdam. Because of a huge demand for passage out of Europe, their sailing had been postponed to June 1940. Meantime, there were growing worries about Germany's plans for further conquest. It soon became clear that Hitler was not going to stop with the occupation of Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. On April 10, 1940, his armies invaded Denmark and Norway. Which country would be next? The refugees who had thought themselves safe in the nations that lay to the west of Germany did not have long to wait for their answer. On May 10, 1940, Germany invaded Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. On May 14th, the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam, Holland's second largest city and one of the world's biggest seaports. This act of destruction brought about a rapid surrender. Within the days, the Dutch royal family fled to England, and the Nazi occupation to the Netherlands began. In the badly damaged city of Rotterdam, the warehouse in which the Bloemfonteins' possessions had been stored was reduced to smoking debris, but Ruth said that was the least of it. We could see now that our escape to Holland had not been an escape at all. Instead, we had been caught in a trap. Ruth was right. There would be no more ocean liners taking refugees to America from the crippled port of Rotterdam. The family would remain in Westerbork, uncertain of its fate under the Nazi regime that had now taken over in the Netherlands. At first, the changes in Westerbork were not as alarming as feared. Additional housing was erected in the form of long wooden barracks, each designed to shelter about 300 men, women, and children. The barracks had tiers of bunk beds and separate latrines for men and women. Later, as the camp became more crowded, up to 600 people were forced to occupy a single barrack. But the Bloemfonteins, like other early residents, remained in their own family unit among the little houses in the older port of the camp. As they had in Germany in the 1930s, the Nazis now began a program designed to impoverish and isolate the Jews of the Netherlands. In October 1940, all Jewish owners of businesses were required to register with the occupation forces. This was the first step in denying Jews employment and stripping them of any means of a livelihood. The following year, Holland's Jews had their properties confiscated, their children were forbidden to attend any but Jewish-run schools, and curfews and other restrictions on their movements were imposed. In May 1942, to help enforce the many anti-Jewish decrees, all Jewish residing in Holland were ordered to sew the yellow star on their outer garments. The center of the six-pointed star bore the black-lettered word Jude, Dutch for Jew, instead of the German Jude. In Germany, the wearing of the star had begun in September 1941. In July 1942, German Jewish boys and girls ages 15 to 18 living in the Netherlands began to receive call-up notices. They were to report without delay to work camps in Eastern Europe. It was at this point that many Jews, both Dutch and German, went into hiding. At Westerbork, the big change took place on July 1st, 1942, when the Germans officially took over command from the Dutch. Immediately, watchtowers were built and barbed wire fence was put up around the entire camp. Also, daily roll calls began, but most ominous was the change in the camp's name. What had been known simply as the Central Camp for Refugees, Westerbork, was renamed under German command Police Supervised Transit Camp Westerbork. The word transit held the key to Westerbork's future as a feeder camp. For the next 2 years and some months, Westerbork served as a deportation center from which more than 100,000 Jews were shipped from Holland to Germany's most notorious concentration camps. At least 60,000 were sent to Auschwitz in Poland. There most met death in the gas chambers. Their bodies were then burned in the cremation ovens. The Germans boasted at the peak of its killing activity in 1943 and 1944, the extermination camp known as Auschwitz-Birkenau could dispose of as many as 4,756 bodies every 24 hours. I'm going to leave it off right there, and I will see you guys in part 2 of chapter 4 in the next video. Bye.